Hi, everybody. We're going to try again. I've been having some trouble with my computer. It cuts out on me too fast, so we're going to give it another try. Henry sat on the steps wishing he had acres and acres of wet lawn. He thought and thought about millions of wet green blades of grass with big fat worms peeping out from under them. The park. Of course, that was it. It was only a few blocks away, and because September had been unusually warm this year, the grass in the park was watered every day. If his mother would let him stay up later than 9 o'clock, he knew he could catch enough worms to pay for the football. Henry went into the living room where his mother was knitting an argyle sock. Mom, could I stay up later tomorrow night? Henry told his mother the whole story. Mrs. Huggins put down the sock. Henry, she sighed, how do you manage to get yourself into such messes? Well, gee, said Henry, I didn't do anything. I just threw this football and Yes, you told me, his mother interrupted. Yes, you may stay up tomorrow night, but for goodness sake, Henry, after this, do be careful with other people's belongings. Saturday was an anxious day for Henry. He wanted to avoid Scooter, but he also wanted to go to the park to make sure the grass was being watered. Unfortunately, he had to pass Scooter's house to reach the park. He walked on the other side of the street, but Scooter was in his front yard tightening the chains on his bicycle. He shook his fist at Henry and yelled, You get me that ball or I'll fix you. You and who else? Henry yelled back and kept on going. When he reached the park, he was relieved to hear the swish of the sprinklers and see water spraying over the grass. He would earn $13.95 before he went to bed that night. That evening, Henry didn't wait for dessert. He borrowed his father's flashlight and several old mayonnaise jars and ran down the hill to the park. It was a warm night, and the tennis courts and swimming pool were floodlighted. It was only beginning to get dark, but Henry hoped it might be dark enough under the bushes to start catching worms. He couldn't afford to waste time. He passed the playground where he heard the children's shouts and the clank and clang of the rings and swings. Henry didn't stop. He had work to do. He went to the edge of the park where there were no lights and turned on his flashlight. Sure enough, there in the grass under a bush was a night crawler. Henry nabbed it and put it into his jar. Then he caught another. He caught worm after worm. 431, 432, 433. Henry was tired of pouncing. Henry was tired of worms. When the lights of the swimming pool went off, Henry was still working. By the time that the lights at the tennis courts went off, Henry was very, very tired of worms. But he kept on. When he added the 1,103rd worm to his collection, he heard someone calling, Henry, Henry, where are you? It was his mother. Here I am. As Henry stood up to rest his aching back, he saw his mother and father walking along the path. My goodness, Henry, Mrs. Huggins exclaimed. Haven't you caught those worms yet? You can't stay out in the park alone at night. But, Mom, I don't have enough worms to pay for Scooter's football, and I promised to get him a new one this week. I have 1,103 worms, and I need to catch 1,331 altogether. I had some money saved, and I earned some last night. Let's see, he needs 228 more. It shouldn't take long to catch them, Mr. Huggins said to Mrs. Huggins. After all, he promised, let's help him. So Henry and his mother and father bent and pounced together. Henry felt a little uncomfortable to see his mother catching worms, but he was very, very glad when the 1,331st worm was in the jar. He took his jars of worms to Mrs. Grumby, who paid him $13.31. As Henry watched him turn the night crawlers into a box of dirt so they would live until Sunday, he thought he never wanted to see another worm. He felt the money in his pocket. I guess this ought to take care of old Scooter, he said, and wishing he could spend it on a football for himself, he went home to bed. Sunday morning, Henry lay on his stomach in the living room floor reading the funny papers. Usually he woke up early and read the funnies before his mother and father were awake, but this morning he was so tired from catching worms that he slept later than usual. The doorbell rang, and Mr. Huggins, who was reading the sports section and drinking coffee, put down his paper and answered the door. Henry heard a strange man ask, Excuse me, could you tell me who owns this football? Henry didn't wait for his father to answer. He ran to the door. The man was holding Scooter's real cowhide football, stitched with nylon thread and laced with buckskin thongs. Golly, said Henry, that's the football I lost for Scooter McCarthy. Whoop, you see it? The man handed it to Henry. I'm sorry I couldn't stop when the ball landed in my car. I had to take my wife to the hospital in a hurry. I would have returned it sooner, but I couldn't leave the kids. That's okay, said Henry. Gee, thanks for bringing it back. When the man had gone, Henry showed the football to his father. See, Dad, he said, this is the kind of football I'm going to buy with my nightcrawler money. Then he tucked the football under his arm as if he were running 90 yards for a touchdown and sprinted down the street to Scooter's house. All turned out pretty well, didn't it? Till next